England, early Victorian era. Duke Walter Harrow of Westford stood before a king promised to a princess, bound by duty to a life mapped since birth. Then he saw her kneeling on cold stone in a forgotten parish, caring for a dying child with hands that trembled from hunger, but never wavered in compassion. In that moment, everything he knew about honor, duty, and love shattered like crystal against marble. What happened next would shake the foundations of the realm itself. The morning fog clung to London's cobblestones like a shroud as Duke Walter Harrow of Westford adjusted his coat against the February chill. At 30 years old, he had perfected the art of standing perfectly still while his world crumbled around him in slow motion. Beside him in the gilded carriage sat Princess Eleanor of Darlington, her posture so rigid it seemed she had swallowed a sword. Her pale fingers rested on her lap, never touching him, never seeking warmth. In 3 months, she would become his duchess. The king himself had arranged it, consolidating alliances that stretched across continents, binding families whose blood had flowed through Parliament for generations. Walter had accepted without protest. Duty was the only language his father had ever taught him. The carriage lurched to a stop outside St. Catherine's Parish, a crumbling building that seemed to lean against itself for support. The stench hit them immediately, unwashed bodies and sickness and desperation thick enough to taste. Princess Eleanor pressed a perfumed handkerchief to her nose. "Your Grace, is this truly necessary?" "The king wishes us to be seen as charitable," Walter replied, his voice flat. "We distribute coins, we smile for the broadsheets, and we leave. Simple enough." She said nothing more, but her silence carried volumes of disgust. Inside, the parish was worse than Walter had imagined. Dozens of bodies pressed together for warmth, children with hollowed cheeks, women with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. The priest, a thin man with kind eyes, greeted them with excessive gratitude that made Walter's stomach turn. "We are honored by your presence, Your Grace, Princess Eleanor. Please, this way." They moved through the nave like ghosts among the living. Walter distributed coins with mechanical precision, his face a mask of aristocratic benevolence. Princess Eleanor remained near the door, barely concealing her impatience to flee. Then he saw her. She knelt on the stone floor in the corner, her simple grey dress pooling around her like water. A child lay in her arms, fevered and shaking, and she pressed a damp cloth to the small forehead with such tenderness that Walter felt something crack inside his chest. Her hair was dark, pulled back without ornament, revealing a face that held no artifice. She whispered to the child, words Walter could not hear. But he watched her lips move and felt an inexplicable need to know what comfort she offered in this place of suffering. The child coughed, a terrible rattling sound, and the woman pulled her closer, rocking gently. She had no crown, no title, no silk gown. But in that moment, she possessed something Walter had never seen in all the ballrooms and throne rooms of his life. She had grace. "Your Grace," the priest said at his elbow, startling him. "That is Miss Alexis Hale, an orphan raised by our parish. She tends to the sick without payment, without complaint. A blessing to us all." Walter meant to nod and move on. Instead, his feet carried him closer. Alexis looked up as his shadow fell across her. Her eyes were deep brown, flecked with amber in the dim light filtering through the dirty windows. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other, and Walter forgot every word of greeting he had ever learned. "The child needs medicine," she said quietly, her voice rough from disuse but steady. "We have none to give her." Walter should have offered money and walked away. Instead, he found himself kneeling beside her on the filthy floor, ruining his expensive trousers without thought. "What does she need?" Alexis blinked, clearly surprised. "Willow bark tea for the fever. Honey if we can manage it. Mostly she needs warmth and time." Up close, he could see the exhaustion carved into her features, the way her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the child's hair. This woman had been awake for days, he realized, fighting death with nothing but determination. "I will send supplies," Walter heard himself say. "Medicine, blankets, coal for heat." "You need not trouble yourself, sir," Alexis replied, but her eyes betrayed her hope. "It is no trouble," he said, and meant it with a ferocity that shocked him. Princess Eleanor's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Your Grace, We are expected elsewhere." Walter rose slowly, unable to tear his gaze from the woman who still cradled a dying child with infinite patience. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but no words came. As he turned to leave, he paused near the doorway where his valet waited. The words escaped before he could stop them, barely a whisper meant for no one. "I cannot take my eyes off her." The valet's expression flickered with surprise, but Walter was already moving, following Princess Eleanor into the grey morning, leaving the warmth of St. Catherine's behind. In the carriage, Eleanor finally spoke. That was revolting. "I trust we need not return to such a place." Walter stared out the window at the passing slums, seeing them truly for the first time. The elegant streets of his life had always been surrounded by this suffering, but he had trained himself not to notice. Now, having looked directly at it, having seen compassion personified in a woman with nothing, he could not unsee it. "We will return," he said quietly. Eleanor's head snapped toward him. "I beg your pardon." "We will return. The king wishes us to be charitable. We must ensure the supplies arrive." Her eyes narrowed. "You are thinking of that woman." Walter met her gaze steadily. "I am thinking of my duty to those less fortunate, Princess. Surely you agree that is proper." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned away, her silence more damning than any accusation. Walter looked down at his hands, still feeling the ghost of cold stone beneath his knees, still hearing the soft murmur of Alexis's voice as she comforted a dying child. In 30 years, he had never questioned the path laid before him. Duty was absolute. Love was weakness. But something had shifted in that crumbling parish, something fundamental and irreversible. He did not yet have a name for it, but it terrified him more than any battlefield, any political intrigue, any disapproval from the crown. That night, alone in his study at Westford House, Walter stood by the window overlooking London's glittering lights. Somewhere out there in the darkness between the mansions, Alexis Hale was probably still awake, still tending to the sick, still giving everything she had to those who could offer nothing in return. He pressed his palm against the cold glass and closed his eyes. What had he done? More importantly, what was he about to do? 3 days passed before Walter manufactured a reason to return. He told himself it was purely administrative. The supplies needed to be delivered personally to ensure proper distribution. His steward had raised an eyebrow at this explanation, but said nothing. Men in Walter's position did not typically oversee charity deliveries themselves. The carriage arrived at St. Catherine's on a grey afternoon, laden with crates of medicine, blankets and food. Walter descended, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by who recognized the Westford crest on his carriage door. Inside, the parish seemed less desperate than before, perhaps because pale sunlight struggled through the windows. The priest hurried forward, nearly tripping over his cassock in his eagerness. "Your Grace, this is most unexpected, most generous. Where is Miss Hale?" The words escaped before Walter could soften them with pretense. The priest's smile widened knowingly. "In the back room, tending to the sick, as always." "Shall I fetch her?" "No." Walter cleared his throat. "I will deliver the supplies to her directly. She will know best how to distribute them." He found her in a small room that smelled of herbs and desperation. She stood at a rough wooden table, grinding something in a mortar with focused intensity. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, revealing forearms marked with small burns and stains from her work. She did not hear him enter. Walter watched her work, mesmerized by the efficiency of her movements, the slight furrow between her brows as she concentrated. When she finally looked up, her eyes widened in genuine shock. "Your Grace." She curtsied awkwardly, nearly knocking over the mortar. "I did not expect you. I brought the supplies I promised." His voice sounded strange to his own ears, too soft, too personal. Her expression transformed, hope lighting her features from within. "Truly? The child little Margaret, she is improving, but others need help desperately. Show me what you require." For the next hour, Alexis guided him through the needs of the parish with a practical intelligence that impressed him. She spoke of fevers and infections, of malnutrition and exposure, never once asking for anything frivolous, always focused on survival. "This willow bark will help with pain and fever," she explained, her fingers gentle as she sorted through the supplies. And this honey, it prevents infection in wounds. You cannot know what this means to us, sir. Tell me about yourself, Miss Hale." Walter surprised himself with the question. She looked up sharply, wariness flickering across her face. "There is little to tell, Your Grace. The priest mentioned you were raised here." Alexis's hands stilled on the medicine bottles. "My mother died bringing me into this world. My father was a sailor who never returned from sea. The sisters taught me to read and write, basic sums. When I was old enough, I chose to stay and help rather than seek employment elsewhere." "Why?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She met his gaze directly for the first time, and Walter felt that same crack in his chest widening. "Because someone must," she said simply. "These people have nothing. No voice in Parliament, no protection under law, no value to society. If those of us who know their suffering turn away, who will bear witness?" Her words carried a quiet fury that made Walter's carefully constructed worldview tremble. In ballrooms, people spoke of charity as a pleasant pastime. Alexis spoke of it as moral obligation. "You shame us all," he said quietly. "I do not mean to shame anyone, Your Grace, but I cannot pretend not to see what stands before my eyes." Walter wanted to tell her that he had been trained his entire life to do exactly that. To look past suffering, to see only duty and decorum and the smooth functioning of power. Instead, he asked, "What do you need most?" Alexis considered the question seriously. A proper stove for heating water, medicine cabinets that seal against moisture, more blankets. "But truly, Your Grace, what we need most is for people to remember that poverty is not a moral failing. These children did not choose to be born hungry." The passion in her voice stirred something Walter had long ago locked away. Here was someone who believed that the world could be better, should be better, and who worked toward that end with her bare hands. "I will arrange for a stove," he said, "and I will return to see that it is properly installed." Alexis's eyes searched his face, confusion evident. "You need not trouble yourself so, sir. You have already been more generous than we could have hoped. It is no trouble." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither dared acknowledge. Over the following weeks, Walter found reasons to visit St. Catherine's that grew increasingly transparent. An inspection of the new stove, a review of how the medicines were being distributed, a consultation about expanding the parish's reach. Each time he stayed longer. Each time he spoke more with Alexis. He learned that she loved poetry, but had only 3 books, which she had read until the pages fell apart. That she hummed while working, melodies that sounded like lullabies. That she was fierce in defense of the children, gentle with the elderly, and possessed a stubborn streak that rivaled his own. One afternoon, as they sorted donated clothing together, their hands brushed, reaching for the same garment. Both froze. The touch lasted only a heartbeat, but Walter felt it burn through him like lightning. "Forgive me," Alexis whispered, pulling back. "There is nothing to forgive." But she kept her distance after that, and Walter felt the loss like a physical ache. At night in Westford House, he attended dinners with Princess Eleanor. She spoke of court gossip, of fashion, of nothing at all. Walter smiled and nodded and felt like a man slowly suffocating. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, commented on his distraction. "You seem elsewhere, Walter. Is something troubling you?" "Nothing, Mother. Simply tired." She studied him with shrewd eyes. "The wedding preparations progress well. Eleanor will make an excellent duchess." Walter said nothing. Agreement felt like betrayal, though he could not say to whom. That night he dreamed of brown eyes flecked with amber, of hands that trembled with exhaustion but never failed in compassion, of a voice that spoke truth without fear. He woke knowing he was in terrible danger. But when his valet asked if he would be visiting St. Catherine's again, Walter heard himself say yes before reason could intervene. Because somewhere in that crumbling parish, Alexis Hale was probably already awake, already working, already giving everything to those who could give nothing back. And Walter, Duke of Westford, promised to a princess, bound by duty to a life mapped since birth, needed to see her again more than he needed his next breath. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing he had felt in 30 years. Spring arrived in London with reluctant warmth, coaxing green shoots from the hard earth. Walter's visits to St. Catherine's had become routine enough that his staff no longer questioned them. What they did question, in whispers he pretended not to hear, was the lightness in his step before each departure, and the shadows under his eyes after each return. On a Tuesday morning in late March, he found Alexis teaching a small group of children their letters. She knelt on the floor among them, her skirt pulled around her, pointing to words chalked on a slate with patient repetition. "This word is hope," she said softly. "Can you say it with me?" "Hope?" the children chorused, their voices thin but eager. Walter stood in the doorway, transfixed. She had tied her hair back with a strip of faded ribbon, and a smudge of chalk marked her cheek. She looked nothing like the powdered ladies of the court with their elaborate coiffures and silk gowns. She looked real. When the lesson ended and the children scattered, Alexis rose with a slight wince, pressing her hand to the small of her back. She turned and saw him, and something flickered across her face too quickly to name. "Your Grace." She curtsied, but there was less formality in it now, more familiarity. "I did not hear you arrive. I did not wish to interrupt." Walter moved closer, drawn by gravity he could not resist. "You teach them well." A flush crept up her neck. "I only share what little I know. Most of these children will never see the inside of a proper school. Perhaps that can change." Alexis met his eyes, and in hers he saw hope warring with painful realism. "You are kind to say so, sir. But the world does not change for people like us. Perhaps it should." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Alexis looked away first, suddenly busy gathering the slates, her movements jerky with nervousness. Walter should have left then. Instead, he found himself helping her, their hands brushing as they stacked the teaching materials. Each touch sent electricity racing through his veins, and he wondered if she felt it too, this impossible pull between them. Over the following weeks, something shifted. The pretense of philanthropy grew thinner, more transparent. Walter came not to inspect supplies, but to see her, to hear her voice, to watch the way sunlight caught in her hair when she moved. He began to see London through her eyes. Behind every grand townhouse lay streets where children begged. Behind every glittering ball lay families who would never taste such abundance. The contrast, once invisible to him, now felt obscene. One afternoon, they worked side by side preparing soup for the parish's evening meal. The kitchen was cramped and hot, steam rising from the massive pot over the fire. Alexis stirred with steady rhythm, while Walter chopped vegetables with unpracticed hands. "You are bleeding, Your Grace." Walter looked down to see blood welling from a small cut on his thumb. Before he could react, Alexis had caught his hand in hers, examining the wound with professional efficiency. "It is nothing," he said, but his voice came out rough. She wrapped his thumb in clean cloth, her touch gentle and sure. Her face was close to his, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, close enough to count her eyelashes. "There," she whispered. "You will survive." But she did not let go of his hand immediately. For a suspended moment they stood frozen, the sounds of the parish fading to nothing. Walter felt his heart hammering against his ribs, felt the warmth of her fingers against his skin, felt the dangerous want rising in his chest. Alexis pulled away first, turning back to the soup with shaking hands. That night, Walter attended a dinner at the palace. Princess Eleanor sat beside him in a gown that cost more than most families earned in a year. She spoke of their upcoming wedding, of the guest list, of which musicians to hire. Walter heard none of it. He saw only Alexis's face, felt only the ghost of her touch on his hand, wondered only what it would feel like to pull her close and never let go. "Your Grace," Eleanor said sharply, "you have not heard a word I have said." "Forgive me, Princess. I am merely fatigued." Her pale eyes studied him with growing suspicion. "You spend a great deal of time at that parish, perhaps too much." "The king wishes us to be seen as charitable," Walter replied carefully. "The king wishes us to be seen together. Yet you go alone now. People are beginning to talk. Let them talk." Eleanor's expression hardened. "I am to be your wife, Walter. I will not be humiliated." "You will not be," he said, but the lie tasted bitter on his tongue, because the truth was that he was already humiliating her. Every day he spent thinking of another woman was a betrayal. Every night he dreamed of brown eyes and gentle hands was a violation of his vows. But he could not stop. The following week, Walter arrived at St. Catherine's to find Alexis sitting on the church steps, her face buried in her hands. Alarmed, he rushed forward. "Miss Hale, what is wrong?" She looked up, and he saw tear tracks on her cheeks. "Old Thomas died this morning. I could not save him." Without thinking, Walter sat beside her on the steps, close enough that their shoulders touched. He wanted to pull her into his arms, but knew he had no right. "You did everything possible," he said quietly. "It was not enough." Alexis's voice broke. "It is never enough. They keep dying, and I keep failing, and sometimes I wonder why I even try. Because you are the only reason many of them survive at all. Because your compassion is the only grace they will ever know. Because you are remarkable." The last word escaped unbidden, hanging in the air between them like a confession. Alexis turned to look at him, her eyes wide and vulnerable. "Your grace, Walter, please, just Walter." "I cannot call you that," she whispered. "It would not be proper." "Nothing about this is proper, Alexis." Her name on his lips felt like prayer and sin combined. She drew in a sharp breath, and he watched her throat move as she swallowed. "You should not be here," she said, but her voice held no conviction. "I know you are engaged to a princess. I know this cannot end well for either of us. I know." Walter turned to face her fully, his control fracturing. "But I cannot stay away. I have tried. God knows I have tried, but every moment I am not here feels like suffocation." Alexis closed her eyes, tears spilling over. "This is madness." "Yes, we will both be ruined." "Yes." "Then why?" Her eyes opened, desperate and afraid. "Why are you doing this to us?" Walter looked at her, this woman who had shattered his carefully ordered world with nothing but her goodness, and finally admitted the truth that had been growing in him for weeks. "Because I am falling in love with you, and I do not know how to stop." The words fell between them like stones into still water, sending ripples that would never cease. Alexis stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. "You must not say such things. You must not even think them." "But I do." Walter rose to face her. "Every day, every night, every moment, stop." Her voice cracked. "Please stop. Tell me you feel nothing, and I will never speak of it again." Alexis met his eyes, and in hers he saw everything he needed to know. She felt it too, this impossible pull, this devastating want. But she said nothing. And in her silence, Walter found both hope and despair. He left without another word, knowing that everything had changed, and nothing could ever be the same. Walter did not sleep for 3 nights. He paced his study at Westford House until dawn, painted the windows gold, wrestling with a decision that felt both impossible and inevitable. On one side lay duty, honor, everything his father had raised him to be. On the other lay truth, and a woman whose existence had revealed the hollowness of his gilded life. By the 3rd morning, his choice was made. He requested an audience with Princess Eleanor in the formal sitting room of her London residence. She received him with her usual cool composure, her blonde hair arranged in elaborate curls, her posture impeccable. "Your Grace," she said, gesturing to a chair, "to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Walter remained standing. He had rehearsed this conversation 100 times, but now that the moment had arrived, every careful word fled his mind. "Princess Eleanor, I cannot marry you." The silence that followed stretched thin as wire. Eleanor's teacup paused halfway to her lips, then lowered slowly to its saucer with a delicate click. "I beg your pardon?" "I cannot marry you," Walter repeated, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "It would be a lie, a dishonor to us both." Eleanor's expression remained perfectly controlled, but something sharp flickered in her gaze. "There is another woman." It was not a question. Walter saw no point in denial. Yes. Her laugh was cold and bright as breaking ice. How delightfully common. The Duke of Westford, reduced to a lovesick fool. "Does she know she has destroyed your future? She knows nothing of my intentions. This is my choice alone." How noble. Eleanor rose, her silk skirts rustling like serpents. "Tell me, Your Grace, is she worth losing everything? Your position at court, the king's favor, your family's respect, your political influence. Is she worth becoming a cautionary tale whispered in ballrooms for generations?" Walter thought of Alexis's hands, wrapped around his injured thumb. of her tears for a dying man she could not save, of the way she said his name like it meant something sacred. "Yes," he said simply. "She is worth all of that and more." Helena's mask finally cracked, fury blazing through. "You are a fool. The king will never forgive this insult. I will ensure he does not." "I understand." "Do you?" Eleanor stepped closer, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You think love conquers all, that your grand gesture will be remembered as romance. But the world is crueler than you imagine, Walter. She will suffer for this, every day, every moment. They will call her whore and opportunist and worse. They will make her life a living hell, and eventually she will hate you for it." Walter felt the words like blows, but he held steady. "That is her choice to make, not yours. Then I wish you joy of your ruin." Eleanor turned away, her voice glacial. "This engagement is ended. Now leave before I forget myself entirely." Walter bowed and walked out, feeling lighter and heavier simultaneously. Behind him, he heard the sharp crack of porcelain against wall. The king's response arrived within hours. A single page, the royal seal like a bloodstain on cream paper. "Your presence is no longer welcome at court. Your privileges are revoked. Your political appointments are terminated. You have chosen disgrace. May you find comfort in it." Walter stood in his study, the letter heavy in his hands, and felt the full weight of what he had done. He was 30 years old, and for the first time in his life, he had chosen something for himself. The cost would be extraordinary. By evening, the scandal had spread through London like plague. His butler reported that 3 families had sent back invitations to upcoming events. His mother arrived at Westford House with fury written in every line of her body. "Have you lost your mind?" The Dowager Duchess swept into his study like an avenging angel. "A princess, Walter. You rejected a princess for some charity case from the slums. Her name is Alexis Hale, and I will not hear her spoken of that way." His mother's eyes widened with genuine shock. "You truly care for this woman. I love her." "Love." She spat the word like poison. "Your father would die of shame if he were alive to see this. Do you understand what you have done? Our family's reputation, built over centuries, destroyed in a single moment of weakness. Father taught me that a man's word is his bond," Walter said quietly. "Would you have me stand at an altar and promise myself to a woman I do not love, while my heart belongs to another? What honor is there in that lie?" The Dowager Duchess stared at him, conflict warring across her features. Finally, she drew herself up with rigid dignity. "You have made your choice. Now you must live with the consequences. Do not expect my blessing." She swept out, leaving Walter alone with the wreckage of his old life scattered around him. His younger brother Henry arrived after midnight, letting himself in through the servants' entrance to avoid the reporters already gathering outside. "You have created quite the storm," Henry said, pouring them both brandy. "I know. Mother is threatening to disown you. Half the peerage is calling you mad. The broadsheets are having a field day. They are calling her the mystery mistress, demanding to know who could possibly be worth such scandal." Henry studied him in the firelight. "Is she, Walter? Is she worth all this?" Walter thought of Alexis's face when she taught children to hope, of her fierce defense of the vulnerable, of the way his soul had come alive in her presence after years of numbness. "More than worth it," he said. "She is everything." Henry sighed. "Then I suppose you had better go tell her before she reads about it in the papers. Because by morning, every journalist in London will be hunting for the woman who stole the Duke's heart." Walter set down his glass, sudden urgency flooding him. "She does not even know. I left her with nothing but a confession weeks ago. Then you are a bigger fool than I thought." Henry stood, clapping him on the shoulder. "Go, before she hears it from strangers." Walter grabbed his coat and ran. The streets were dark and dangerous at this hour, but he barely noticed. All he could think was that Alexis was about to wake to a nightmare, and he needed to reach her first to explain, to ask what his heart demanded he ask before the whole world descended on them both. He needed to ask her to be his wife, and pray that she would say yes. Walter reached St. Catherine's as the first grey light of dawn crept over London's rooftops. The parish was silent, but he knew where to find her. She was in the small chapel, kneeling before the altar with a candle burning beside her. Her lips moved in silent prayer, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles showed white. He must have made a sound because she turned sharply, her eyes widening when she saw him disheveled and breathing hard from his run through the streets. "Your Grace." She rose quickly, confusion and concern warring on her face. "What has happened? Are you injured?" Walter closed the distance between them, his heart hammering. "Alexis, I need to tell you something before the whole world does." "You are frightening me." He took her hands in his, feeling them tremble. "I have ended my engagement to Princess Eleanor." The color drained from her face. "What?" "I told her I could not marry her. I told the king. I have lost his favor, my position at court, likely my family's support. By this afternoon, every newspaper in London will be demanding to know the name of the woman who caused such scandal." Alexis pulled her hands free, backing away. "No, no, you did not. Tell me you did not do this. I love you, Alexis. I cannot marry someone else while my heart belongs to you." She pressed her hands to her face, her breathing rapid and shallow. "You have destroyed yourself. For what? For me. I am nobody, Walter. Nobody. An orphan who cannot even properly hold a teacup. Do you understand what you have done? I understand perfectly." "No, you do not." Alexis's voice rose, echoing in the empty chapel. "You live in a world of silk and silver. You have never been hungry, never been invisible, never been nothing. I have lived my entire life watching people like you look through people like me as if we do not exist. And now you think love is enough to bridge that chasm? I think love is worth trying. Trying." She laughed, a desperate sound edged with tears. "They will destroy me, Walter. The newspapers, the society ladies, everyone who resents seeing someone like me rise above my station. They will call me whore and gold digger and scheming temptress. They will say, I manipulated you, seduced you, trapped you. And part of you will eventually wonder if they are right. Never. You cannot promise that." Alexis wrapped her arms around herself, looking small and afraid. "In a year, 5 years, 10, when the scandal has ruined your family's name and cost you everything, you will look at me and resent what I cost you." Walter stepped closer, his voice fierce. "Look at me." She raised her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "I have spent 30 years doing what others expected," he said. "Being the perfect heir, the obedient son, the dutiful duke. I smiled at the right people, said the right things, felt nothing. I was a clockwork man, Alexis, going through motions without purpose. Then I saw you kneeling on cold stone, caring for a dying child with hands that trembled from exhaustion but never faltered in compassion. In that moment, I felt something crack open inside me. You showed me what it means to be truly alive, to care about something beyond duty and appearances. I would rather be ruined and real than perfect and empty. You do not understand what you are asking me to endure. Then let me endure it with you." Walter dropped to one knee on the chapel floor, the same floor where he had first seen her. "Alexis Hale, I am offering you my name, my home, my future, everything I have and everything I am. I know the world will be cruel. I know we will face obstacles I cannot yet imagine. But I also know that I love you with everything in me, and I cannot bear the thought of living another day without you by my side." Her hands covered her mouth, muffling a sob. "Will you marry me?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of impossible choices. Alexis looked at him kneeling before her, this duke who had given up a kingdom for the chance to kneel in a humble chapel. "I am terrified," she whispered finally. "So am I. I will fail you. I will say the wrong things, use the wrong fork, embarrass you in front of your world. You could never embarrass me." Walter reached for her hand. "You are the bravest, most genuine person I have ever known. Let them see who you truly are, and they will have no choice but to love you as I do." Alexis closed her eyes, tears falling freely now. She thought of the life she knew, small and safe and predictable. Then she thought of this man who had seen past every wall society had built, who had chosen her when he could have had anyone, who looked at her like she was worth losing everything. She opened her eyes and met his gaze. "Ask me again tomorrow," she said softly. "Ask me when the sun is high and you have had time to reconsider. Ask me when you are thinking clearly. I am thinking clearly for the first time in my life. Then ask me tomorrow, And if you still want this, if you still want me despite everything it will cost, I will say yes." Walter rose, cupping her face gently in his hands. "I will ask you tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until you believe that this is real." He pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in, feeling her warmth, her realness, her perfect, imperfect humanity. Outside, London was waking to scandal. But here, in this small chapel where it had all begun, two people stood together in the fragile hope that love might be enough, even when the whole world insisted it was not. Before we continue with what happened next, I want to ask you something. This story is about two people fighting against impossible odds for love. If you believe in stories like this, if you think love is worth the struggle, would you subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments what you would do if you were in Alexis's position? Would you say yes to the Duke, knowing it would cost you everything? Or would fear hold you back? I really want to know your thoughts. Now let's see what Alexis decided when morning came. Morning came with Walter standing outside St. Catherine's once more, his resolve unshaken by sleep or sunlight. Alexis met him at the door, her eyes shadowed but clear, and before he could speak she whispered the word that would change everything. Yes. Within 2 days, Walter had moved her to Westford Manor in the countryside, far from the ravenous journalists prowling London streets. The decision was practical, protective, and utterly overwhelming for Alexis. The carriage ride took 4 hours, and with each passing mile, Alexis felt the weight of her choice pressing harder against her chest. She clutched a small leather bag containing everything she owned, a worn prayer book that had belonged to her mother, a handkerchief embroidered by the parish sisters, a crude drawing of St. Catherine's made by one of the children she had taught, and 3 books with broken spines. Walter sat across from her, watching her face with concern as the landscape transformed from crowded streets to rolling green hills. "You have gone very quiet," he said softly. "I am trying to imagine what lies ahead." Alexis looked down at her rough hands, stained from years of work. "I do not belong in a manor, Walter. You belong with me. That is all that matters." But even he could not hide the worry in his eyes as the carriage turned through massive iron gates and Westford Manor rose before them like a mountain of stone and glass. Alexis had never seen anything so enormous. The building sprawled across the hilltop, its windows catching the afternoon sun like 1,000 watching eyes. Perfectly manicured gardens stretched in every direction, fountains splashing, peacocks strutting across immaculate lawns. She felt her chest tighten with panic. The staff lined up to greet them, dozens of servants in crisp uniforms, their faces carefully neutral as they studied the woman who would become their duchess. Alexis saw curiosity in some eyes, skepticism in others, and outright hostility in a few. Mrs. Pemberton, the head housekeeper, was a stern woman of 50 with iron-grey hair and a spine like a poker. She curtsied with precise correctness that somehow conveyed disapproval. "Welcome to Westford Manor, Miss Hale." The emphasis on Miss felt like a small knife between the ribs. Walter squeezed Alexis's hand. "Mrs. Pemberton will help you settle in. I have arranged for Miss Caroline Ashford to serve as your lady's maid and companion. She is kind and patient, and I trust her completely." A young woman stepped forward, perhaps 25, with warm brown eyes and a genuine smile. "Miss Hale, it is an honor. Shall I show you to your rooms?" Alexis followed Caroline through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past paintings of stern ancestors whose eyes followed their progress with judgment. The walls were covered in silk, the floors in carpets so thick her footsteps made no sound. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls overhead. Everything was beautiful. Everything was terrifying. "Your apartments, miss." Caroline opened double doors to reveal rooms larger than the entire ground floor of St. Catherine's Parish. Alexis stood frozen in the doorway. The bedroom held a 4-poster bed with velvet curtains, a sitting area with delicate chairs that looked like they might shatter if she sat too heavily, and windows overlooking gardens that seemed to extend to the horizon. An adjoining dressing room held wardrobes already filled with gowns she had never chosen. "His Grace commissioned a wardrobe for you," Caroline explained, seeing her expression. "The seamstress used measurements from your old dress. If anything does not fit properly, we can adjust it." Alexis walked slowly to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Behind her, She could see Caroline waiting patiently, and beyond the open door, the vast manor stretched in every direction. "This is not my world," she whispered. "It can be, miss." Caroline's voice was gentle. "Give it time." But time seemed to move differently at Westford Manor. The days blurred together in a haze of lessons that left Alexis feeling more inadequate with each passing hour. A stern etiquette instructor named Lady Weatherby arrived each morning to drill her on the intricate rules of aristocratic society. Which spoon to use for soup, which for dessert. How to curtsy to a duke versus a marquis. The proper way to address servants, to enter a room, to accept a compliment. "No, no, no," Lady Weatherby snapped, as Alexis fumbled with a teacup for the 100th time. The handle between thumb and forefinger, not your whole fist like a farmer. Again. Alexis's hands shook, making the delicate porcelain rattle. She set it down carefully, fighting tears of frustration. "Perhaps we should take a break," Caroline suggested quietly. "A duchess does not take breaks from basic competence," Lady Weatherby said coldly. "Again, Miss Hale." Dance lessons were worse. The instructor, a painfully thin Frenchman named Monsieur Beaumont, tutted in disgust as Alexis stepped on his feet for the 3rd time in as many minutes. "You move like a peasant," he declared. "Have you no grace at all?" "I am trying," Alexis said, her voice small. "Trying is not sufficient. You will be presented in society as the Duchess of Westford. Do you wish to humiliate His Grace with your clumsiness?" The words hit like physical blows. Alexis stopped moving, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed in front of this cruel man. That evening, she sat alone in her massive bedroom, feeling more isolated than she ever had in the crowded poverty of St. Catherine's. At least there she had known her place, known her purpose. Here she was a permanent mistake, a wrong note in a perfect symphony. A knock at the door made her quickly wipe her eyes. Walter entered, concern written across his face. "Caroline said you did not come down for dinner. I was not hungry." He crossed to where she sat by the window, moonlight painting her in silver. "You have been crying. I am fine. Alexis, look at me." She turned and the dam broke. "I cannot do this, Walter. I cannot be what they need me to be. Today I used the wrong fork at lunch, and Mrs. Pemberton looked at me like I had committed murder. I stepped on Monsieur Beaumont's feet during the waltz, and he called me graceless. Lady Weatherby makes me feel like an imbecile who cannot be trusted with basic crockery. I do not belong here. I will never belong here." Walter knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. "You are right." The words shocked her into silence. "You will never belong in their world," he continued, his voice fierce, "because their world is built on pretense and performance, on following meaningless rules that exist only to separate those with power from those without. You belong in the real world, Alexis, where people matter more than protocol, where compassion outweighs correct fork usage, where the content of your character means everything and the way you hold a teacup means nothing at all. But I must learn these things. I cannot embarrass you. You could never embarrass me." Walter cupped her face gently. "You are struggling because you see through the absurdity of it all. You have spent your life doing work that matters, saving actual lives, and now you are being scolded for not knowing which direction to pass the port. It is ridiculous, and your difficulty with it is proof of your sanity, not your inadequacy. Then why does it hurt so much? Because they are cruel, and because you have a tender heart." Walter brushed away her tears with his thumbs. "But you're also strong, stronger than any of them. You survived poverty that would have broken these pampered aristocrats in a day. You faced death and disease without flinching. You can survive this too." Alexis leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his presence. "What if your mother never accepts me? What if I fail you? My mother will come around, and you could never fail me, Alexis. Never." He pulled her close, and she buried her face against his chest, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her cheek. His arms wrapped around her like a fortress against the hostile world outside. They stayed like that for a long time, the moon rising higher beyond the windows, the manor settling into silence around them, and slowly, held in Walter's embrace, Alexis began to believe that perhaps she could endure this. Perhaps love really could be enough. When Walter finally pulled back, he kept hold of her hands. "Tomorrow dismiss Lady Weatherby. She is needlessly cruel, and I will not have anyone speak to you that way in your own home. But I need to learn. Then we will find someone kind to teach you. But no one, Alexis, no one has the right to make you feel small. Do you understand?" She nodded, fresh tears spilling over. But these were different. These were relief. "Come," he said gently. "You must eat something. We will have supper brought to the small sitting room, just the two of us. And you can tell me about the children at St. Catherine's. I want to hear about the real world again." As they walked together through the quiet corridors, Walter's hand steady in hers, Alexis felt the tightness in her chest ease slightly. The manor was still overwhelming, the challenges still enormous, but she was not facing them alone. And perhaps, she thought, that would have to be enough. The morning newspapers arrived at Westford Manor like clockwork, and with them fresh poison. Walter tried to keep them from Alexis, but she was not blind to the way servants whispered, to the way Caroline's cheerful demeanor sometimes slipped into worry. One afternoon, while Walter was meeting with his estate manager, Alexis found a discarded broadsheet in the library. The headline screamed in bold letters, "The Mystery Mistress Revealed." Below it, a crude illustration showed a woman in rags climbing into a ducal carriage, her face twisted with cunning greed. The article beneath was worse, calling her a fortune hunter, an opportunist who had bewitched the Duke with feminine wiles, a nobody who had stolen the place rightfully belonging to a princess. "They claim I seduced you in a church," Alexis said quietly when Walter found her still holding the paper, her hands shaking. "They say I am a schemer who saw an opportunity and took it." Walter tore the broadsheet from her hands and threw it into the fireplace, watching it curl and blacken. "They know nothing. They are selling scandal to bored housewives and idle gossips. But people believe it." Alexis looked up at him, her eyes dark with pain. "Your friends, your family, everyone who matters to you believes I manipulated you. Anyone who truly knows me knows that is impossible. But the damage was spreading like wildfire." Letters arrived daily at Westford Manor, most of them venomous. Former friends of Walter's family wrote to express their disappointment, their disgust, their determination to cut all ties with a man who had so thoroughly disgraced himself. The Dowager Duchess sent a single line, "You have made your choice. Live with it." Walter's younger brother Henry visited more frequently, though even he seemed troubled by the intensity of the backlash. "The court has turned completely against you," he reported during one visit, pacing Walter's study. "Mother refuses to speak your name. Half the families we have known for generations have declared you persona non grata." "Let them," Walter said, though Alexis could see the tension in his jaw. "This is not sustainable, Walter." Henry stopped pacing, his expression serious. "You need allies. You need someone with influence to stand with you publicly, or this scandal will swallow you both whole. Who would be foolish enough to support us now?" Henry hesitated. "There might be someone. Lord Samuel Hastings. He was your closest friend at university, was he not? Until I broke the engagement." Walter's voice was bitter. "He has not written since. Perhaps you should write to him first." Walter did not hold much hope, but desperation made him pen a letter that night, honest and vulnerable in a way that felt dangerous. He sent it with no expectation of response. The reply came 3 days later. Samuel Hastings arrived at Westford Manor in a cloud of dust, his carriage horses lathered from hard riding. He was a tall man with an open face and intelligent eyes, and when Walter met him at the door, Samuel embraced him without hesitation. "You fool," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You magnificent, idiotic fool." Walter pulled back, surprised. "You are not here to condemn me. I came to apologize." Samuel's expression was serious. "When the scandal first broke, I believed what everyone said, that you had lost your mind, thrown away everything for a passing infatuation. I am ashamed to say I stayed silent when others spoke against you. Then why are you here now?" "Because I investigated." Samuel glanced past Walter to where Alexis stood uncertainly in the hall. "I made inquiries at St. Catherine's parish. I spoke to the priest, to the people she helped, to the children she taught. And do you know what I found?" "What?" "A woman of uncommon compassion and integrity. A woman who has spent her entire life in service to others without thought of personal gain. A woman who, according to every person I spoke with, tried to refuse your proposal because she feared the cost to you." Samuel's voice strengthened. "The newspapers call her a schemer. The evidence suggests she is precisely the opposite. Alexis felt tears prick her eyes. You did not have to do that, my lord. Yes, I did. Samuel bowed to her with genuine respect. Because my friend loves you, and I trust his judgment more than I trust society's gossip. Miss Hale, I am here to offer my support and to ask your forgiveness for my initial silence. There is nothing to forgive, Alexis said softly. You were wise to be cautious. No, I was a coward, but I intend to make amends. True to his word, Samuel began working immediately. He wrote letters to progressive members of Parliament, to families he knew harbored doubts about the rigid social order, to anyone who might be persuaded to look past scandal to truth. More importantly, he simply stayed. His presence at Westford Manor lent legitimacy, showed that at least one respected peer believed Walter had not lost his mind. One evening, Samuel and his wife Charlotte joined them for dinner. Charlotte was warm and genuine, and she immediately took to Alexis, ignoring proper protocol to sit beside her and chat like old friends. I think what you did was terribly brave, Charlotte said over dessert. Accepting a proposal that you knew would make your life infinitely more difficult. That is not the action of a gold digger, that is love. Alexis glanced at Walter across the table, finding him already watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. After dinner, Samuel and Charlotte tactfully retired early, leaving Walter and Alexis alone in the drawing room. Rain had begun to fall outside, pattering against the windows, and someone had lit a fire that cast dancing shadows across the walls. Walter poured 2 glasses of wine and brought one to Alexis where she stood by the window. Their fingers brushed as she took the glass, and neither pulled away immediately. Today was better, she said quietly. Having friends here. Samuel believes in us. Walter moved closer until she could feel the warmth radiating from him. That is more than I dared hope. Alexis turned to face him, her back against the window frame. He stood so close now that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. The air between them felt charged, electric with unspoken want. Walter, she whispered, her voice unsteady. He set both wine glasses aside, his movements deliberate and slow. Then he raised one hand to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. I have been trying to be proper, he said, his voice low and rough. Trying to give you space to adjust, to not rush you. But Alexis, every moment I am not touching you feels like slow suffocation. Her breath caught. I feel it too. Tell me to stop, and I will. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. Do not stop. Walter's other hand came up to frame her face, tilting it up to his. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but she did not move. When their lips finally met, it was like striking flint to steel. The kiss started gentle, questioning, but within heartbeats it deepened into something urgent and desperate. Alexis's hands came up to grip the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, and Walter made a sound low in his throat that sent heat flooding through her entire body. His hands slid from her face to her waist, pulling her flush against him. She could feel his heart racing, feel the tension in his muscles as he held himself in check. One hand moved up her back, fingers tracing her spine through the thin fabric of her dress, and she gasped against his mouth. Walter pulled back slightly, his breathing ragged. We should stop. Why? Alexis's voice was barely audible. Because if we do not, I will not want to. His forehead rested against hers, his eyes dark with barely restrained desire. And you deserve better than to be rushed. I am not made of glass, Walter. I will not break. He groaned, the sound vibrating through both of them. You are making this very difficult. Good. She reached up to trace the line of his jaw with trembling fingers. I do not want it to be easy. Walter captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that made her knees weak. Then he kissed her wrist, the sensitive skin of her inner arm, the curve of her shoulder where her dress had slipped slightly. Alexis tilted her head back, giving him access, her fingers tangling in his hair. Every touch felt like fire and safety combined, like coming home and leaping off a cliff simultaneously. They moved together to the settee by the fire, Walter pulling her down beside him, their bodies pressed close. His arm wrapped around her waist, holding her secure while his other hand cupped the back of her neck, angling her face for deeper kisses. Time lost meaning. There was only the warmth of the fire, the sound of rain against windows, the taste of wine on his lips, the feeling of his hands learning the contours of her body through her dress with reverent patience. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexis found herself half lying across Walter's lap, her hair tumbling loose from its pins, his cravat askew where her fingers had clutched it. "We are engaged," Walter said, his voice hoarse. "No one can fault us for this. I do not care if they do." Alexis traced the line of his lips with one finger. "Let them talk. Let the whole world talk. I'm tired of being afraid." Walter caught her finger in his mouth, kissing it gently, and the gesture was somehow more intimate than anything that had come before. "I love you," he said, "more than I have words to express. Show me then." So he did, with kisses and touches and whispered words against her skin, until the fire burned low and the rain stopped, and the night wrapped around them like a blessing. They did not go further than propriety allowed, but by the time Caroline knocked softly to remind Alexis it was late, they both understood that the wedding could not come soon enough. Because this fire between them, this need and want and perfect rightness, could not be denied much longer. The world could whisper all it wanted. Here, in the warmth of Walter's arms, Alexis finally felt like she belonged. The wedding was set for a crisp morning in early May, when the gardens of Westford Manor bloomed with impossible colour. Walter had wanted to give Alexis the grandest ceremony London could offer, but she had quietly requested something smaller, more intimate, away from the eyes that had judged them so harshly. So they married in the small chapel on the manor grounds, a stone building covered in climbing roses that had stood for 300 years. The guest list was brief, but meaningful. Samuel and Charlotte Hastings arrived first, Charlotte carrying a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself. Henry came alone, their mother having sent a terse note declining the invitation. A handful of progressive peers, who Samuel had convinced to support the match, attended, their presence more political statement than celebration. The priest from St. Catherine's made the journey, bringing with him 3 of the children Alexis had taught, scrubbed clean and wide-eyed with wonder. Most touching of all, a dozen people from the parish came dressed in their shabby best, standing at the back of the chapel, with tears in their eyes as they watched their Alexis marry a duke. Caroline had helped Alexis dress that morning in a gown of ivory silk that Walter had commissioned specially. It was simpler than a typical aristocratic wedding dress, with clean lines and minimal embellishment, but it fit her perfectly. Her dark hair was swept up with tiny white roses woven through it, and she wore no jewelry, except a strand of pearls that had belonged to Walter's grandmother, smuggled to him by Henry against their mother's wishes. "You look like moonlight," Caroline whispered, her eyes shining. "He will not be able to breathe when he sees you." She was right. When Alexis walked down the short aisle on Henry's arm, having no father to give her away, Walter's expression transformed. His eyes widened, his lips parted slightly, and he gripped the altar rail so hard his knuckles went white. "She is extraordinary," Samuel whispered beside him, and Walter could only nod, unable to form words. Alexis reached the altar, and Henry placed her hand in Walter's with unexpected gentleness. "Take care of her, brother," he murmured, "or answer to me." "Always," Walter promised. The ceremony was simple and profound. The old priest spoke of love as choice, as daily recommitment, as the decision to see and be seen in return. He spoke of 2 people from different worlds choosing to build a new world together, and his words carried weight that no amount of pomp could match. When it came time for vows, Walter's voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I, Walter Harrow, take you, Alexis Hale, to be my wife. I promise to honor you, to protect you, to stand beside you against whatever storms may come. I promise to never forget that you chose me when it cost you everything, and to spend my life proving worthy of that choice. I promise to love you until my last breath, and beyond, if God permits." Alexis's voice trembled but did not break. "I, Alexis Hale, take you, Walter Harrow, to be my husband. I promise to be brave when fear threatens, to stand firm when the world pushes back, to believe in us, even when belief feels impossible. I promise to remind you always of the real world beyond these walls, to keep your heart tethered to compassion and truth. I promise to love you with everything I am, for as long as I live." When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Walter cupped Alexis's face with both hands and kissed her with such tenderness that several of the parish women openly wept. "You are mine now," he whispered against her lips. "And I am yours, forever," she whispered back. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. The dining room had been open to all the guests, aristocrats and parish poor, sitting together at the same table, sharing food and wine and stories. It was perhaps the most radical act of the entire day, this breaking of social barriers, and Walter could see the shock on some faces and the approval on others, but he barely noticed. He could not take his eyes off his wife. His wife. The words sang through him like music. As evening fell and guests began to depart, Caroline appeared at Alexis's side. "Come, Your Grace, let me help you prepare." The title still sounded strange to Alexis's ears, but she followed Caroline upstairs to the Duchess's apartments, which she had never entered before. They were connected to Walter's chambers by a door that had remained locked since her arrival. Tonight, that door would open. Caroline helped her out of the wedding gown and into a nightdress of silk so fine it was nearly transparent. Alexis stared at herself in the mirror, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. "He loves you," Caroline said gently, brushing out Alexis's hair until it fell in dark waves past her shoulders. "Let that be enough to quiet your fears." "I am not afraid," Alexis realized aloud. "I am ready." Caroline smiled and slipped away, closing the door softly behind her. Alexis stood alone in the candlelit room, her heart racing. She heard movement in the adjacent chamber, the sound of Walter's voice thanking his valet, the soft click of a door closing. Then the connecting door opened, and Walter stood there in his shirt sleeves, his coat and cravat discarded, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked younger like this, more vulnerable, and achingly handsome in the warm candlelight. They stared at each other across the threshold, the weight of the moment pressing down like something physical. "Hello, husband," Alexis said softly. "Hello, wife." Walter crossed to her slowly, as if approaching something precious that might startle and flee. When he reached her, he took her hands in his, raising them to his lips one at a time. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with barely controlled desire. "We can wait if you need more time. I have waited my whole life for you." Alexis lifted her face to his. "I do not want to wait another moment." Something in Walter's expression shifted, the careful control giving way to raw need. He kissed her, and this kiss was different from all the others, deeper and more urgent, a claiming and a surrender all at once. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her against him, and she could feel the heat of his body through the thin silk of her nightdress. Her own hands explored the planes of his chest through his shirt, feeling his heart hammer beneath her palms. Walter's lips left hers to trace a burning path down her throat. Alexis tilted her head back, her fingers tangling in his hair, small sounds of pleasure escaping her lips before she could stop them. "Do not hold back," Walter murmured against her skin. "I want to hear every sound, know every touch that pleases you." His hands moved to the buttons of her nightdress with trembling fingers. He paused, looking into her eyes, silently asking permission. Alexis nodded, and the silk whispered as it fell away. Walter's breath caught. "You are perfect. Absolutely perfect." "Show me," she whispered, echoing words she had spoken once before. "Show me how much you love me." He lifted her into his arms with easy strength, carrying her to the bed hung with velvet curtains. The sheets were cool against her skin, but Walter's body was fire as he settled beside her, his hands mapping her curves with reverent patience. Alexis reached for his shirt, tugging it free, desperate to feel his skin against hers. Walter helped her, shrugging out of the garment, and then there was nothing between them but heat and want and perfect rightness. Their coming together was both tender and passionate, a dance of give and take, of whispered encouragements and gasped pleasures. Walter moved with careful control at first, constantly checking her comfort, but Alexis pulled him closer, deeper, showing him without words that she was not fragile, that she wanted all of him, I love you, he breathed against her ear as they moved together in ancient rhythm. I love you, I love you, I love you. Alexis could only gasp his name in response, overwhelmed by sensation, by emotion, by the sheer intensity of being so completely known and wanted and cherished. When release finally crashed over them both, it felt like shattering and becoming whole simultaneously, like dying and being reborn in the same breath. They clung to each other through the waves of pleasure, breathing each other's names like prayers. Afterwards, Walter gathered her close, her head resting on his chest, their legs tangled together beneath silk sheets. His hand traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, and she felt his lips press against her hair. Are you well? He asked softly. I am more than well. Alexis tilted her face up to kiss his jaw. I am exactly where I belong. They made love twice more that night, each time discovering new ways to bring each other pleasure, learning the language of each other's bodies with patient devotion. Between, they talked in whispers, sharing secrets and dreams, planning a future that had once seemed impossible. As dawn began to paint the windows gold, Alexis lay wrapped in Walter's arms, watching his sleeping face in the growing light. His features were relaxed, peaceful, one hand possessively curved around her waist even in sleep. For the first time since accepting his proposal, she felt no fear. The world outside might still be hostile, the future uncertain, but here in this room, in this bed in his arms, she had found something worth fighting for. She had found home. The summer following their marriage brought unexpected change. Alexis, now the Duchess of Westford in name and law, refused to hide in the countryside, while the world whispered about her unworthiness. Instead, she worked. With Walter's full support and Samuel's strategic guidance, she established the Westford Foundation for the Poor. It was not a vanity project for a bored aristocrat, but a systematic approach to addressing poverty that drew on her years of experience at St. Catherine's. She opened schools in London's poorest neighbourhoods, hiring teachers who actually cared about the children. She arranged for doctors to provide free care 1 day per week at designated clinics. She organised a system for distributing food with dignity, not charity that humiliated its recipients. Most radically, she insisted on visiting these places herself, refusing to simply sign checks and maintain distance. Walter often accompanied her, and together they would sit in cramped rooms listening to the needs of families whom society had rendered invisible. The newspapers, hungry for new angles on the scandal, began to shift their coverage. Where once they had mocked the mystery mistress, now some writers grudgingly acknowledged the Duchess who had been poor, and what she accomplished with her unexpected position. She understands their suffering because she lived it, one editorial noted. Perhaps that is precisely what our charity system needs. Someone who knows hunger is not a moral failing, but a circumstance that could befall any of us. Not all coverage was positive. Many still called her an upstart, claimed she was performing for attention, insisted she would tire of slumming once the novelty wore off. But slowly, inevitably, some opinions began to soften. The real shift came when a cholera outbreak threatened to devastate the East End. While other wealthy families fled London for their country estates, Alexis mobilized the foundation's resources. She worked with doctors to set up quarantine areas, arranged for clean water distribution, personally delivered medicine to infected households. Walter tried to forbid her from entering contaminated areas, terrified of losing her. They had their first real argument about it. I will not sit safe in the manor while people die from lack of help, she said firmly. You knew who I was when you married me, Walter. Do not ask me to become someone else now. I cannot bear the thought of losing you, and I cannot bear the thought of living if it means turning my back on those who need me. He capitulated, but insisted on accompanying her, and together they spent exhausting weeks fighting death in streets that smelled of sickness and desperation. When the outbreak finally subsided, having claimed far fewer lives than previous epidemics, even the king took notice. The summons arrived on a warm afternoon in late August. His Majesty requested the presence of the Duke and Duchess of Westford at the palace. Alexis felt her stomach drop. This is it. He will formally denounce us. Or, Walter said carefully, he will do what kings do best, adapt to changing circumstances. The audience was held in a small private chamber, not the throne room. That alone was significant. The king sat in a high-backed chair, looking older than Alexis remembered from that single glimpse months ago in the parish. "Your Majesties," Walter said, bowing deeply. Alexis curtsied as Caroline had taught her, grateful that her hands did not shake. "Duke Westford," the king said, his voice measured, "you created quite the scandal when you broke your engagement to Princess Eleanor." "I did, Your Majesty. I offer no excuse except that I could not in good conscience make vows I did not mean." The king's gaze shifted to Alexis, studying her with uncomfortable intensity. "And you are the woman worth losing a kingdom for." Alexis lifted her chin, meeting his eyes despite every instinct screaming to look away. "I never sought to cause scandal, Your Majesty. I accepted the Duke's proposal knowing it would bring hardship, but I could not deny what we felt for each other." The king was silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled slightly. "You know, my own marriage was arranged. I have lived 50 years with a woman chosen for political advantage. We are cordial, respectful, but there is no fire between us, no passion, no true partnership." He leaned forward. "I have received reports of your work, Duchess. Unprecedented charitable efforts, real results, lives saved. You are not what I expected." "What did you expect, Your Majesty? An opportunist, a social climber using beauty and feminine wiles to secure a position. Instead, I find a woman who risks her own health to serve the poor, who uses her new power not for personal gain, but for genuine good." The king sat back. "I cannot officially approve of how this marriage came to be. Eleanor's family still harbors resentment, and there are political considerations I must maintain. However, I can cease my active opposition. You will not be welcomed back to court immediately, but neither will you be formally shunned. Time, I suspect, will determine your ultimate acceptance." Walter's hand found Alexis's, squeezing gently. "That is more than we dared hope, Your Majesty. We are grateful." As they left the palace, Alexis felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They were not fully forgiven, but they were no longer outcasts. The real test came 2 weeks later, when Samuel and Charlotte announced they were hosting a grand ball at Hastings House. It would be the first major social event the Duke and Duchess of Westford attended as a married couple. "The entire ton will be watching," Charlotte warned as she helped Alexis prepare. "They want to see you fail, stumble, prove you do not belong. You must be perfect." Alexis wore a gown of deep sapphire silk that brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. Diamonds borrowed from Charlotte glittered at her throat and ears. Caroline had arranged her hair in an elegant style that had taken 2 hours to perfect. When she descended the grand staircase at Hastings House on Walter's arm, the ballroom fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned to watch them. Alexis felt every gaze like a physical touch, judging, assessing, waiting for her to prove their worst assumptions correct. Her hand tightened on Walter's arm. "Breathe," he murmured. "You are magnificent, and they know it." Charlotte and Samuel greeted them warmly at the entrance, making a show of embracing Alexis, signaling their support to everyone watching. Then the music started, and Walter led her to the dance floor. The first waltz was theirs alone, every other couple giving them space, watching. Alexis had practiced this dance 100 times with patient instructors, but nothing had prepared her for doing it under such scrutiny. "Look at me," Walter said softly. "Only at me." She fixed her eyes on his face, seeing love and pride reflected there, and suddenly the watching crowd faded to insignificance. He guided her through the steps with practiced ease, and she followed, their movements synchronized as if they had danced together for years. When the music ended, there was a beat of silence, then applause, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. Other couples joined them for the next dance. Lord Pemberton, a progressive member of Parliament whom Samuel had cultivated, asked Alexis to dance. As Walter released her hand, she saw both trust and slight anxiety in his eyes. Pemberton was a skilled dancer and a shrewd conversationalist. "You have caused quite the stir, Duchess. So I understand, my lord. Tell me, do you regret it? The scandal, the struggle." Alexis met his gaze steadily. "Not for a moment. I love my husband, and I believe our marriage has allowed me to do good work that would otherwise have been impossible. If that makes me scandalous, I can live with scandal." Pemberton smiled, a diplomatic answer and an honest one. Rare combination. You may survive this yet, Your Grace. As the evening progressed, more people approached her, some with genuine curiosity, others with thinly veiled hostility, a few with surprising warmth. Lady Ashford, an elderly countess with a reputation for saying exactly what she thought, cornered Alexis near the refreshment table. "You are not what I expected," the countess said bluntly. "What did you expect, my lady? A simpering fool or a calculating witch? You appear to be neither." She studied Alexis with sharp eyes. "I knew your husband's grandmother. She would have liked you, I think. She always said this family needed someone with backbone to shake them out of their complacency." "That is high praise, my lady, thank you." "Do not thank me yet." The countess's expression sobered. "You have a long road ahead, girl. Society is slow to forgive and even slower to forget. But if you continue as you have begun, with dignity and purpose, you may yet win them over." As midnight approached, Alexis found herself standing on the terrace with Charlotte, watching couples dance through the glass doors. "You did beautifully," Charlotte said, squeezing her hand. "There were some turned-up noses, but far fewer than expected. You conducted yourself with grace and intelligence. I still feel like an imposter. That feeling may never fully go away." Charlotte smiled sadly. "I am a merchant's granddaughter who married a lord. I have been accepted for 20 years, and I still sometimes feel out of place. But you know what I have learned? Everyone feels like an imposter sometimes. The aristocracy is built on pretense. You simply have less practice pretending than they do." Walter found them there, bringing champagne and wearing an expression of such fierce pride that Alexis felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You were extraordinary," he said, pulling her close once Charlotte tactfully slipped away. "Every person in that ballroom saw what I see every day, a woman of intelligence, compassion, and strength. They cannot help but respect you. Some still hate me. Some will always hate you." He tipped her chin up, his eyes serious. "But many are beginning to see the truth. We are winning, Alexis. Slowly, perhaps, but we are winning." She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, breathing in his familiar scent. Around them, London sparkled in the late summer night, full of judgment and possibility in equal measure. The battle was far from over, but for the first time Alexis believed they might actually prevail. 5 years passed like water through cupped hands, each day building on the last until the scandal that had once consumed them became merely footnote in a much larger story. The Dowager Duchess held out longer than anyone. For 3 years, she maintained her silence, refusing every invitation to Westford Manor, returning every letter unopened. Walter bore it with stoic grace, though Alexis saw the pain in his eyes whenever news of his mother reached them. Then came the letter that changed everything. It arrived on a cold November morning, addressed in the Dowager Duchess's distinctive hand. Walter opened it with trembling fingers while Alexis waited, her own heart pounding. "She wants to visit," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She asks permission to come to the manor. What did you tell her about me?" "Nothing she has not heard from others by now." Walter looked up, his eyes shining. "She knows of your work, of the Foundation's expansion, of the schools and clinics. She knows we are happy. Perhaps that is finally enough." The Dowager Duchess arrived on a grey afternoon, her carriage stopping before the manor's entrance with military precision. She descended in a rustle of black silk, her face carefully composed, her spine rigid with the pride that had sustained her through decades of aristocratic life. Alexis met her at the door, curtsying with the grace that years of practice had made second nature. "Your Grace, welcome to Westford Manor." The older woman studied her with sharp eyes that were so like Walter's it made Alexis's breath catch. "So you are she. The woman who stole my son. I prefer to think I found him, Your Grace. Or perhaps he found me." A ghost of a smile flickered across the Dowager Duchess's face. "Bold. I can see why he likes you." Over tea in the drawing room, they spoke with careful politeness, circling each other like wary cats. The Dowager Duchess asked about the Foundation, about the manor's management, about Alexis's daily routine. Her questions were pointed, designed to uncover weakness or incompetence. But Alexis had spent 5 years learning to be a duchess. She answered with confidence and detail, showing financial records when asked, discussing the challenges of expanding charitable work, explaining the delicate balance between aristocratic duty and social reform. Walter watched the exchange with barely concealed anxiety, ready to defend Alexis at the first sign of attack. But the attack never came. Instead, as the afternoon wore on, his mother's rigid posture gradually relaxed. She asked about the schools, really asked, listening to Alexis describe the curriculum with what seemed like genuine interest. "You remind me of someone," the Dowager Duchess said finally, her voice softer. "Walter's grandmother. She was born to privilege, but never forgot that privilege was accident of birth, not measure of worth. She would have liked you, I think." "That is the second time someone has told me that," Alexis said quietly. Lady Ashford said the same. "Agatha Ashford is a meddling old woman, but she is rarely wrong about people." The Dowager Duchess set down her teacup with careful precision. "I came here prepared to dislike you, to find proof that you were unworthy of my son, that this marriage was a mistake he was too proud to admit. And," Walter's voice was tight with tension, "and I find instead a competent woman who manages this estate well, who has used her position to accomplish genuine good, and who clearly adores my son." The Dowager Duchess met Alexis's eyes directly. "I have been foolish, holding on to anger that served no purpose except my own pride. I cannot undo the pain I caused by my silence, but I can choose differently going forward." She paused, the words clearly difficult. "I would like to know my daughter-in-law if she will permit it." Alexis felt tears prick her eyes. "I would like that very much, Mother." The title hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. The Dowager Duchess's expression cracked, revealing vulnerability beneath the aristocratic mask. "Come here, child." Alexis crossed to her, and the older woman pulled her into an embrace that smelled of lavender and old grief. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I let fear and pride blind me to what was right before my eyes." From that day forward, the Dowager Duchess became one of Alexis's staunchest supporters. She used her considerable influence to smooth remaining rough edges in society's acceptance, making it clear that anyone who wished to remain in her good graces would treat the Duchess of Westford with respect. The full reconciliation came with the birth of Walter and Alexis's first child. The labor was long and difficult, 17 hours that left Walter pacing the hallway like a caged animal. When the midwife finally emerged to announce a healthy daughter, he burst into the room to find Alexis exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in white linen. "A girl," she whispered. "We have a daughter." Walter knelt beside the bed, his fingers trembling as he touched the baby's impossibly small hand. "She is perfect. You are perfect. What shall we name her?" Walter looked at his wife, this woman who had transformed his life so completely, and thought of all the people who had shaped their journey. "Eleanor Alexis," he said. "After the princess who released me to find true love, and after you, the love I found." Alexis's eyes widened. "You would honor her that way. She could have made this much harder. She chose dignity instead. And our daughter deserves a name that speaks of grace, even in difficult circumstances." When the Dowager Duchess met her granddaughter, she wept openly, all pretense of aristocratic composure abandoned. "She looks like you did as a baby," she told Walter, then looked at Alexis. "Thank you for this gift, for giving us future when I nearly destroyed our present." More children followed. A son they named Thomas Henry after the old man who had died in Alexis's arms, and the brother who had never stopped believing in them. Another daughter, Catherine, after the parish where it all began. Each child was raised with understanding that their privilege was responsibility, not entitlement. The foundation expanded beyond London, establishing schools and clinics across England. Other aristocratic families, seeing the genuine impact, began similar efforts. Alexis's model of charity with dignity rather than condescension became blueprint for reform. Years passed, marked by seasons and milestones. Eleanor Alexis grew into a thoughtful girl, with her father's eyes and her mother's fierce compassion. Thomas became a scholar who studied poverty and social reform. Catherine declared at age 8 that she would become a doctor to help people who could not afford care. One morning, 15 years after that first glimpse in St. Catherine's, Alexis stood on the terrace at Westford Manor watching the sunrise paint the gardens gold. She was 40 now, threads of silver in her dark hair, lines around her eyes from years of laughter and struggle. She felt arms wrap around her from behind, Walter's chin resting on her shoulder as he pulled her back against his chest. His hair was streaked with grey now, his face more lined, but his embrace was as warm and secure as it had been on their wedding night. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured against her ear. "Everything. How far we have come. How impossible this all seemed once. Do you regret any of it?" Alexis turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had given up a kingdom for her. Not a single moment, even the pain, the struggle, the fear. It was all worth it to be here now, with you. Walter kissed her, soft and sweet and full of 15 years of accumulated love. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every sacrifice, every scandal, every moment of doubt, because it led us here." Their children's voices drifted from inside the manor, arguing good-naturedly about something. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the stones and gardens that had witnessed their transformation from scandal to legend. Society had eventually accepted them, as the Dowager Duchess had predicted. Some still whispered about the unprecedented marriage, but most now spoke of them with respect, even admiration. The Duke who had chosen love over duty, and the Duchess who had proven worthy of that choice. But the real measure of their success was not in society's acceptance. It was in the schools that bore the Westford name, in the children who learned to read because Alexis had fought for their education, in the families who survived illness because she had demanded they receive medical care, in the slow but steady shift in how the powerful viewed the powerless. It was in 3 children who understood that compassion was not weakness, but strength. It was in a marriage that had weathered every storm and emerged not just intact, but stronger. It was in 2 people who had looked at an impossible choice and chosen love anyway. That evening, the entire family gathered for dinner. The Dowager Duchess presided at one end of the table, her former coldness replaced with warm engagement as she listened to Catherine describe her day. Henry and his wife laughed at something Thomas said. Eleanor helped serve the younger children, patient and kind. Walter reached under the table to take Alexis's hand, squeezing gently. She squeezed back, their silent communication as fluent as spoken words after years of practice. This was what they had built from scandal and rejection. Not just a family, but a legacy. Not just acceptance, but transformation. As the candles burned low and the conversation flowed around them, Alexis looked at the faces gathered at their table and felt profound gratitude. The road had been hard, harder than she could have imagined that day in the chapel when she whispered yes to an impossible proposal. But Walter had been right all along. Love was worth it. Love was worth everything. Sometimes the greatest love stories are not about finding perfection, but about choosing imperfection together. Walter and Alexis did not have an easy path. They faced rejection, scandal, and a world determined to keep them apart. But they chose each other anyway, again and again, in moments large and small, until those choices built a life that transformed not just themselves but everyone around them. Their story reminds us that real love demands courage. It asks us to risk comfort for truth, to value connection over convention, to believe that the heart knows things the mind cannot calculate. They proved that love does not conquer all obstacles effortlessly, but rather gives us reason to fight through them. Perhaps that is the question we must each answer for ourselves. When love asks us to be brave, when it costs us everything we thought we wanted, will we have the courage to say yes? If this story touched your heart, if you believe in love that transforms and endures, please leave a like on this video. It helps more people find stories that remind us what truly matters. And please subscribe to this channel for more stories about courage, love, and the choices that define us. I would love to know where you are listening from. Are you in London where this story took place? Somewhere else in England? Or perhaps on the other side of the world? Leave a comment telling me your location and what this story meant to you. Your words and presence here mean everything. Thank you for spending this time with Walter and Alexis. May their courage inspire yours.